So hello there. I hope you're doing well. And if you've been following along, welcome back. And if this is a one-off and maybe your first episode, then welcome. And thank you for listening. And I hope you find something useful, something meaningful for yourself here. So I'm reading On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this book is written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, an American Buddhist monk. And he's widely respected for his translations of Buddhist texts and his teachings on meditation and the Dhamma. His works are deeply rooted in the Theravāda Buddhist tradition, emphasizing a direct and practical approach to the Buddhist teachings. So we have been exploring one sutta, Sutta 130, for quite a while. And as far as that goes, we've been exploring right view for quite a while. And it's really my hope, but I also don't want to wear you out. If you like long form, I realize that, some people really love 3 to 4 hour long form, and that's great. But I really do try to keep these episodes around an hour. Sometimes I'll go, over a good deal, but I try to avoid that. But I might actually do that today, depending, because today might be the day that I actually finish up with Right View in Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu's lovely book, which means that for the next episode, we would be moving into chapter 4, and Right Resolve. Yeah, so I admit it. I can feel my craving for the end of chapter 3. Chapter effing 3, man. But in all seriousness, this time for me is a gift. Yeah, and I enjoy putting it out there too, I admit. So, if you are indeed following along in this free book, so you can just read the description here and find a link to the free book that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu made available for you to read. Then we're on the bottom of page 233, the top of page 233. Dependent co-arising, Sutta 130. Been spending quite a bit of time on this already. And if this is your first time listening and you're interested, you like what you hear here, and you actually want to learn more about Buddhism, then yeah, I would definitely recommend either starting the book from the beginning on your own, or maybe starting this podcast from the beginning, so that you can have a context for everything that's going on today. And so we're picking up with feeling. Feeling. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns feeling, the origination of feeling, the cessation of feeling, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of feeling, then he is a person of right view who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is feeling? What is the origination of feeling? What is the cessation of feeling? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of feeling? There are these 6 feelings. Feeling born from eye contact, feeling born from ear contact, feeling born from nose contact, feeling born from tongue contact, feeling born from body contact, feeling born from intellect contact. This is called feeling. From the origination of contact comes the origination of feeling. From the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of feeling is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So I got a little bit ahead of myself in the last episode, but quite frankly, only because I felt that I needed to be able to explain it in a way that made sense to me. So I can't help, but drop in, sixth sense media is what Buddha called it, big feature of the aggregates. But it's virtually impossible to talk about all of this, to my view, without talking about the senses, because it's core to our embodiment. And I'm not saying that you can't experience embodiment if you can't use one of your senses, not at all. In fact, you can find research that correlates the not having a particular sense available to you. And so I don't want to use overcompensating, that sounds negative. So another sense, strengthening strengthening. It's almost as if our body is working to be embodied, and it just takes whatever it's given to do it. This is my opinion now. I'm saying this is kind of how I imagine it in my mind. So it's hard for me to not talk about Sixth Sense media, even though we haven't actually got to the notion of Sixth Sense media in the book yet, but we are today. Yeah, we're just about there. So feelings born from eye contact. So I love movies, and I feel like that doesn't really do my sentiment about movies justice. Movies were a very important part of my life growing up. I would say to the point of being unhealthy, but is it, whatever. I don't want to get all judgy, certainly not on you, and I'm trying to work on not being judgy on myself, which also makes me judgy on you, right? It's good to work on being judgy and trying to notice when I'm being judgy and to catch it and say, hey, I'm being judgy. So, hey, I'm being judgy. But yeah, movies were a huge part of my life. Musicals were a huge part of my singing cultivation. So just thinking about eye contact for a moment, because I am lucky enough. Maybe I shouldn't use the word lucky. I don't know what it's like to not have a sense. I don't want to make any presumptions about anything here. I'll just say that I have all my senses. My vision is very poor, but I have it. I can correct my vision and see a movie. I can hear a movie. So we'll just kind of work with those two senses alone. I remember being a young teenage girl, very, puberty really is when life just turns into a living hell. I think, if you've gone through it, then perhaps you can remember. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not like a shared human experience, but I bet you that I'm not. I've never done any research on that. Because to my understanding, that has much more to do with our biology, and we all have that. We all are working with the same inner material in that regard. Perhaps some of you can relate to this. My teenage years were, not compared to many, just, when I reflect back on it, there was a lot of stress. There was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot. It's good material now, to my view, because what it's done is, I got stress tested really young. You know what I'm saying? I got stress tested really young. And that's really helped me as an adult, actually, really quite a bit. But, listen to earlier episodes. It has its challenges that come with it too, that I get to use as practice now. So one of the things that made my teenage years memorable in a really joyful, joyous way is, movies, and sharing those movies with my mom, sharing those movies with my stepdad. For this particular time in my life, I would have been living with my mom and my stepdad for most of it. Those movies were story. So my eyes and my ears, your eyes, your ears, if you also like movies or you also like TV or fill in some other experience where you're using your eyes and ears at the same time to experience media. I just go to films because they were such a big part of my life. Perhaps you can think of a movie or a TV show or some other media where you can couple the idea of sight and sound. And if you're someone who's listening that doesn't have access to sight or doesn't have access to sound, then maybe you can recall other sensations, because maybe you even have access to other sensations. I don't know. I have sight and sound, as I say. But if you were to really break down, what the Buddha was getting at here with this relationship of feeling in relationship to our six senses, dependent co-arising, right? This is all part of dependent co-arising. Then I recall that how movies represent a flagship of joy in a very painful time in my life is the story that I was consuming with my eyes and my ears. And if you really want to break it down and get antiseptic about it, which I would imagine most people wouldn't, right? We don't want to see the wizard behind the curtain. Or at least a lot of us don't. Some of us do. Sadly, I'm one of those people that just, where is it? But at any rate, you're experiencing the sights of of what's on the screen. You're listening to the sounds of what's on the screen. Again, I was a huge fan of musicals, and so music is a big part of that for me as well. I would cry sometimes. Sometimes I would become obsessed. I would have repetitive thoughts, fantasies, about having the life of the characters in the movie, or finding that love that the character found in the movie. One could say, I don't know if that's a very healthy relationship with media, Sarah. And then on the other hand, one could say, hey, you moved around a lot as a young person. When I think back on my childhood, or I just think back, there was just a lot of stress, for good or for ill. There's just a lot of stress. And so those movies, they fed into dependent co-arising. So I'm gonna go on, because I'm sure that this makes sense, because we can all identify, even if we don't have access to a sense, we can identify with how our senses produce experiences within us. And as I mentioned, I am running an ongoing event using VR. I mean, you can also join from a laptop, but for people who don't have VRIs and can participate in VR, great. And it's really about this idea of recognizing that taste is one of those senses, as mentioned here, under feeling. And that, when we taste whatever it is that, in my case, we use or used, or, whatever that gestalt is for comfort, that produces something in us, right? When the taste of chocolate, when I can taste it, well, there's a physiological thing that's happening for me, but there's also a psychological thing that's happening for me there. I hope this isn't getting too weird, and so I'm gonna go on. I'm just gonna move on. So the next one here is contact. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns contact, the origination of contact, the cessation of contact, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of contact, then he is a person of right view who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is contact? What is the origination of contact? What is the cessation of contact? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of contact? There are these 6 classes of contact: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, intellect contact. This is called contact. From the origination of the 6 sense media comes the origination of contact. From the cessation of the 6 sense media comes the cessation of contact. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of contact is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So I realize that what I just talked about inherently had contact within it. So going back to cake, or let's take one. I mean, I'm trying to think, what were my favorite binge foods back in those days? Let's go with donuts. Yeah, so let's take the donut. In my case, the beloved donut. So the Buddha here is talking about eye contact. So I'm walking around in a convenience store and I see this bright pink with sprinkles. In my mind, without my conscious awareness, I might add, all kinds of connections are being made. Pink, pretty, making associations with The Simpsons, making associations with all kinds of the associations that I am making with this idea of what I'm visually seeing, pink donut. Not to mention the memories I have. And those memories will sometimes even spark a smell or a scent. Or what's worse for me is that if I'm at the convenience store early enough, the smell is actually there. So I can actually see those beautiful pink and all the memories I have with my beloved, my precious pink donut. And I also have the smell. So how can you win? Right? This is why, for those of you who struggle with food addiction, and how can you not? I live in the United States. I live in Los Angeles. I mean, for Pete's, if you have a physiological relationship with food, it's asking too much of someone, really, to just gut it out when they're surrounded by, sixth sense media in that regard. But anyway, don't get me started. So once again, there's that contact. And then, oh my gosh, did you read what one of these 6 classes of contact is? For Pete's sakes, it's tongue contact. Give me a break, really? Yeah, Well, that pretty much sums up my bulimic behavior for 20 some odd years of my life right there. And then, of course, there's the gestalt that goes along with that. I know I use that word a lot, but it's because it's what's happening, the intellect contact, our freaking mind, our conceptual mind. I shouldn't have that. You're probably going to be, you're not going to only have one. There's all kinds of, all the things, right? All the things. So I'm giving you like a really kind of, I'm drawing on my own experience, trying to think of something that I can use that's very salient in my life. But this can apply to something way more subtle than like a hardcore eating disorder, right? This can be, think about your relationship to your phone. Just do a little pontificating on that one, Take a moment, think about how you use your phone. Maybe keep a phone diary for just one day. Just say, okay, I commit to myself that tomorrow I'm going to keep a phone diary. And every single time I pick up my phone, I'm going to write it down. And if if we're really dependent on something, then we don't have enough awareness to do that. And so something that we can use to help us develop awareness and not be checked out, right, go unconscious with the phone, is to maybe put like a rubber band around your wrist and get in the habit of snapping it when you go to your phone. That will remind you to write down in your diary when you use your phone. And then at the end of that day, go back and look at your diary and then contemplate what we're reading today for yourself. See if it fits. See if the model fits. Yeah, again, I mentioned really early days of this book that one of the things that drew me to Buddhism is I was lucky enough very early days to get to hear parts of the historical Buddhist teachings wherein he said, see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I've mentioned before, I don't do authority. No, I don't do authority figures. I'm not saying I won't work for people who try to exert authority over me or who have authority over me within a chain of command. As I mentioned, I was in the military. Of course I can do authority. Are you kidding me? I would have been grand marshaled if I couldn't do authority. But what I mean is that I decide when I do authority. Yeah, if that makes sense. So, yeah, the Buddhism was very appealing for me. I hope that analogy of the, pink sprinkled donut with its tantalizing smells, if you get to the shop early enough and you can smell it coming out of the oven, you can even smell that frosting. I mean, even as I'm talking right now into this microphone, I can see it in my mind and I can even really remember the smell, so this is Buddhist psychology, right? Buddhist psychology. Speaking of sixth sense media, let's get into that. Sixth sense media. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns the sixth sense media, the origination of the sixth sense media, the cessation of the sixth sense media, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of the sixth sense media, then he is a person of right view who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what are the sixth sense media? What is the origination of the sixth sense media? What is the cessation of the sixth sense media? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of sixth sense media? There are these six sense media: the eye medium, the ear medium, the nose medium, the tongue medium, the body medium, the intellect medium. These are called the six sense media. From the origination of name and form comes the origination of the six sense media. From the cessation of name and form comes the cessation of the six sense media. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of the six sense media is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And because we've kind of already been talking about this relationship quite a bit, I'm going to keep on reading and then, see if I have anything that's even, worth commenting on, or if it feels just really straightforward, then I'll just keep going. But I doubt it. I'm sure I'm going to want to speak to name and form, which is what we're going to get to right now. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns name and form, the origination of name and form, the cessation of name and form, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of name and form, then he is a person of right view, who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is name and form? What is the origination of name and form? What is the cessation of name and form? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of name and form? Feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. This is called name, the four great elements, and the form dependent on the four great elements. This is called form. This name and this form are called name and form. From the origination of consciousness comes the origination of name and form. From the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of name and form. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of name and form is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And so this one is just like those before. It is leaving us with the idea that what we're about to read, consciousness, our consciousness leads to name and form, which leads to six sense media, etc., etc., etc. So we're right in the thick of the chain here. And name and form, to my view, is, I don't feel like I can do it justice without revisiting some of the stuff I learned a long time ago. And as I mentioned, and yes, I do use AI that's trained on Buddhist texts. And so that's important for you to know. I want to be very upfront about that. But I also have been exposed to these teachings quite a bit myself and have been practicing quite a bit, but I'm not ordained. And so I really encourage you that if these episodes are interesting you in Buddhism, please don't rely on me. Let this maybe be something for you to maybe rip apart. Maybe you can take it upon yourself to fact check me on every single one of these with a monk or a nun or someone someone that's much, much closer to these teachings than some white chick living in Los Angeles, right? So anyway, I'm going to go use that robot to help me with this a little bit and use my own discernment through 25 years of practice to see if I can catch AI in any shenanigans. And I'll be right back. Okay, so coming back, and so glad I did. Bringing back a lot of memories too. Yeah, like I said, it's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've pondered the suttas. Nama is what AI says is the Pāli word for name, nama. The feature of the mind that organizes. It's how we make meaning, right? We organize, we perceive reality, we take in with the six senses or whatever we have available to us, and we have a mechanism. And again, I'm not like a neuroscientist. You can do your own research on how this actually plays out in psychology. And so you have this function of the mind, the nature of mind, and how it will organize and try to make sense of what it's taking in. Nama. So what's part of nama? Feeling, or vedana. So feeling, this kind of affective tone. In Buddhism, kind of hit on this earlier in the book, Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu did. Apparently the Buddha talked about these ideas regarding feeling in relationship to three potential feeling states. Pleasant, it's a good feeling, we feel good. Unpleasant, we don't feel good. And neutral, yeah, there's no particular feeling state present. So what else is part of nama? Perception. Now again, fact check me on this because, Robot is claiming to give me the Pāli terms for these. So it's saying that perception in Pāli is sana, and I don't know if I'm putting the right emphasis on. Our mind is organizing. feeling, organizing, and then perception. We're recognizing, tagging things, making patterns, finding patterns. Intention, satana, is next. We have a feeling, perception, intention. So that feeling and perception with a name produces an intention within us. So if it's a pleasant feeling, then perhaps our intention is to hold on to it. This feels really good. This feels really good. Now, to my understanding, in different spiritual traditions, this idea of feeling really good plays different roles. In some traditions, you're really encouraged to produce feeling good states all the time. And in Buddhism, you're also engaging in ritual that produces feeling good. But that is not the aim of Buddhism. The aim of Buddhism is not to feel good all the time. Perhaps what we're perceiving / feeling is unpleasant. So maybe the intention is to get as far away from it as possible, right? So again, I realize there are some traditions that would, and again, even in Buddhism, there is discernment, right? In other words, if I'm in a situation wherein it's violent or it's harmful to me or to others, if I am in a position to do so, I'm out of there, baby. That's my action. Or I roll up my sleeves and get busy. If for me, I mentioned I'm scrappy, if I see that harm is coming to someone else. So intention, if it's neutral, and to my mind, this is where, if someone were to ask me, hey, Sarah, you taught for 20 years, if you were going to get access to a room full of first-year teachers, maybe you're like fresh out of, educators college or, whatever program that you're in, maybe you haven't really spent time in the classroom. Now, I outside of your studies, I taught adults. Okay, I taught college, so they were adults, and I taught community college. So not only were they adults, but most of them, their brain was done developing. You know what I mean? Most of them, they were over 26 years old. And I'm sorry if that offends you, but that is a biological reality, that our brain is very malleable, but it essentially is done doing what it needs to do to fully develop, not until we're in our mid-20s. So you can go check the science on that for yourself. So if I had an opportunity to talk to teachers that were getting ready to teach, a very wide, broad demographic, because community college also I did have people that were still in high school, dual enrollment, so that was really cool. I got to work with people that were maybe 16, 17, but I also got to work with people who were, 65, 70, so really cool. I loved it. What I would say to those first-year teachers is, I'd say, hey, here's something that I noticed about humans when I was in the classroom working with them, because I taught a very creative, I'm a sound designer. And interestingly, I got the job to run the radio program. I think it's because of my sound design background. And I got to, run that radio station and even had a show on that radio station for a while. And I love it. I love radio. I love to listen to radio, ears, listening. And you could even say that when you have strong sound design, that you bring in a sense of, the visual with memory, because the sound, anyway, I don't want to get off on some geeky sound design class, but I almost think it really doesn't matter what you teach, so that's what I taught, great radio, video production. But I think it's irrelevant what you teach. Here's the thing, going back to the intention, and actually really going back to feeling, vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. What I started to notice over my nearly 20-year career in community college education, so I started to notice a trend systemically, I guess you could say, of people that were kind of maybe lived in a state of neutral. And there's nothing, to my understanding, I'm almost afraid to speak to this, because I don't want to suggest that there's anything wrong with being in a neutral state. Neutral is a state that we're in. And I also, neutral in a way is kind of what is celebrated, if you could use, I don't know if celebration's a word that one would associate with Buddhism, but this idea of taking the middle path or not becoming attached, right? So I realize this is a really slippery slope that I'm getting into paradox territory, and I want to be careful about that, because to my view, speaking for myself, I don't experience life neutrally. maybe if I was a nun and I did have that kind of practice, where I was spending my life, my waking hours in deep meditation, I would. But I find that the truth is that I don't live in a neutral state. This engine that's talking to you doesn't really idle much in neutral. I wish I could. I mean, and I can get there, but it takes effort on my part. Usually, I experience things fairly strongly. As I mentioned, I'm passionate, so it's not just pleasant, it's unbelievably orgasmically pleasant, or it's not just unpleasant, it's, the end of the world, etc., etc. And training and Buddhism has really helped me inordinately there, that kind of helped me to recognize, that I have a very sharp, I guess, feeling experience, and I can, for my own development and my own kind of well-being, I can separate the feeler from the feeling, and that comes through meditation practice. At least that's what we do in Buddhism. I'm sure there's lots of other things. So, and then I'm sure that Christians and Catholics and Jews and Muslims, and I'm sure that all indigenous communities that have spiritual traditions, I'm sure that we all have ways of working with this idea of the feeling state. And what do we do with the feeling state? What is the feeling state? So again, I'm just kind of coming at you from Buddhism. Contact. So, we've been talking about that, making contact. And then attention, what the system orients toward. And again, I find that going back to teachers, so what happens when people are kind of locked into neutral? Why can that be a quote unquote potential challenge? Neutrality can often, not always, but neutrality may not be an adaptation that feels useful for the person feeling it. It might be an adaptation that is actually not serving the person. And so this kind of numbing out, we all do it to some degree. At some point in our life, we have either consciously or unconsciously have numbed out to not feel pain, physical pain, emotional pain, all of the above. The Buddha here is suggesting something really important, and I know it's not just Buddhism that has this idea. Again, I don't want to speak to other traditions because I want to honor them, and I don't. Again, I'm on a slippery slope here, even with Buddhism, But it is something that I do my best to practice with the knowledge that I do have, and I would imagine that most traditions have some kind of relationship with this understanding that it's feeling that produces intention. And so if we're feeling neutral, and maybe that neutral is again kind of serving. I'm getting in too deep, and I don't want this to be this hardcore because I don't feel like it, and I don't understand it enough to even know how deep it goes. I'll just say that in my experience of teaching, students will come into my classroom exhibiting almost a constant neutral kind of response to life. They don't seem interested, sometimes despondent, just wholly disinterested, And to my view, it's not their job, because they've walked through the doors of my class, to magically be able to experience the feeling state or to produce or work with the feeling state. Remember that to Buddha's view, my understanding, the Buddhist psychology, is that our access to the feeling state is contingent upon a lot of other things that student walking through my door had zero control over. So then my job becomes, well, I'm seeing apathy here, and I believe, because I do, and again, here's what I can also say of 20 years of teaching, I've seen it for myself dozens and dozens of times, so that's all I need. Is to see, well, this is effective. This is an effective method. And it's not like I made it up. And again, I don't want to get into, people who taught this way and, John Dewey and Maria Montessori and Jean Pierre, anyway, blah, blah, blah. But if I can help the student for themselves, and lucky for me, I had small classrooms. I had like classrooms of 15, which quite frankly, if your classes are over that size and you're teaching production, I don't think you're getting a very good education. I'm just going to tell you outright. You can't. It's not possible. You need smaller classes to learn production. It's just get your money back. Go somewhere else if you can. My job then becomes about how can I help them find for themselves what is going to move the needle. And it does, I find, usually come back to story. And, one of the great gifts for me of teaching radio is that I got to teach all that. I got to teach radio documentary. And so, in the advanced radio class that I taught, it was really very much like a media lab. It was, the students had several assignments. They had 4 different assignments, but I think the one that they seemed to traditionally like the most was the documentary assignment. And I had different variations of it. I would kind of cycle through them and switch them out to kind of see which ones the students seemed to like the most. And the one that the students seemed to like the most was when they would get paired up with a classmate, someone that they didn't know. And if someone had a lot of anxiety around that, then I would say, that's all right, find someone that's fine. Don't, I want you to feel pleasant for this assignment. I actually want you to feel pleasant for this assignment. It's not my job right now to stress test you, So then I would say you're going to bring in, practices that they'd already been doing live, interviewing skills. And I kind of made this fun activity, where they interviewed each other and they had to tell their partner's story, not their own. So why am I telling you all of this? That assignment moved the needle more than anything else that I can think of as a teacher, moving my students from neutral to pleasant. And what do I mean by pleasant? The kind of pleasant that induces the intention of making a life change, or that induces profound change in them. Maybe seeing another perspective for the first time. I remember one year, I don't really know how well this went over. I don't want to say that I regret it. When I was a kid, I don't know if students are still like this, but I know when I was a kid, teachers were kind of in this weird space for me of like, I remember thinking when I was really young, do they go to the bathroom? Like, I wonder if they, I don't know where I thought they weren't human, but anyway, so we are human. And I was, I had this opportunity and I thought, man, I'm going to stress test the students. And, it went over incredibly well for some, and for others, they were pissed, and I heard about it. But I had this opportunity for that particular assignment to work with this nonprofit organization in Los Angeles, and they were a care facility for people that had disabilities that were, quite severe, so that they required 24/7 care. They couldn't, live on their own independently. So various degrees. Some had extreme Tourette's, quadriplegic. So different things going on. And they came down to the college. They came down to the radio station. They came into the studio because we had a really nice radio studio there. They actually came in, and I had my students partner with one of these individuals that came to the campus. They came to the campus for one day. This particular class was a 4-hour class. And so the students had 4 hours to do pre-interview and prep, and I really mostly left them alone. That's my style. I'm very much let students fall down and scrape their knee, and, if I see they're really struggling to recover from that fall, then I'll go over. I pay very sharp attention. I've been meditating a long time. I'm very present when I teach. I'm very much there. And I could see, that some of them were really suffering with the anxiety of having to try to be professional and get a story out of someone that was not operating cognitively in a linear fashion. And for some, that was traumatizing. And, they let me know, and I was so glad that they did. I wasn't certainly not intending to traumatize them. Really my intention was really to kind of give them an opportunity to practice empathy. Maybe to to have an opportunity to reflect on their own precious life. Not to say that the people that they were interviewing didn't have a precious life. Of course they did, but look at how hard their life is compared to a student in college class, even if it's community college, right? That's what some people think community college is less than. You don't even know. You don't even know, okay? You don't even know. And form, rupa, is kind of that manifestation in the world, how it materially exists in the world and how we relate to it. So it's, we have the elements, which we've already explored in this book: fire, water, earth, wind, place. Anyway, you can go back and find that episode or that section in the book. And, and whatever depends on those elements, right? We don't really have a lot of, control over this. The phenomenology of the body, if you will. That sensory input channel plus the phenomenal of the body. And again, I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but I think a great way to think about it is to maybe explore what's happening in embodied cognition in the field of psychology, which seems to have a really good understanding of Buddhist psychology, or what the Buddha was kind of trying to get at here. Yeah, and then, kind of how they function together, and interestingly, the Buddha put them together almost as if it had hyphens, name and form. Name and form. Because to his view, I have to assume that he did that because of how, dependent co-arising, how much they relied on each other to produce, to make manifest, to manifest what we are, in fact, experiencing in our experience. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here. And then, we're going to keep on going. And so that means that we'll be picking up at the bottom of page 235, or midway through. Consciousness. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns consciousness, the origination of consciousness, the cessation of consciousness, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of consciousness, then he is a person of right view, who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is consciousness? What is the origination of consciousness? What is the cessation of consciousness? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of consciousness? There are these 6 classes of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, intellect consciousness. This is called consciousness. From the origination of fabrication comes the origination of consciousness. From the cessation of fabrication comes the cessation of consciousness. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of consciousness is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And so we're coming up on fabrication, a really big concept in Buddhism. And, as I mentioned previously, we're kind of working backwards, kind of looking at causes. And then the end of the passage explains that what we're about to read, or I should say effects. And then at the bottom of the passage, we kind of get into causes, So again, it's this kind of repetition stylistically of how one feeds the next, and then that feeds the next, and then that feeds the next, and then so on. So I actually want to keep going here and get into fabrication, and then I'll maybe say a few words about this relationship between fabrication and consciousness. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns fabrication, the origination of fabrication, the cessation of fabrication, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of fabrication, then he is a person of right view, who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is fabrication? What is the origination of fabrication? What is the cessation of fabrication? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of fabrication? There are these 3 fabrications: bodily fabrication, verbal fabrication, and mental fabrication. These are called fabrication. From the origination of ignorance comes the origination of fabrication. From the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of fabrication. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of fabrication is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Wow. So Buddha here is saying, hey, it's our ignorance that feeds fabrication. I'm gonna double check myself to make sure that I'm remembering this accurately, rather than just going off on some drift. And I'll come back in a moment to unpack these two together. Fabrication feeds consciousness. So I'll be right back. So here we go. I think I'll start with fabrication. The thing that Buddha said produced consciousness, fed consciousness, brought it into being, dependent co-arising. Fabrication maybe represents our moment-to-moment activities. And I do mean moment-to-moment that are shaping the experience of our life. So bodily habits that we might have, emotional impulses, examined or unexamined, mental constructions, name and form, right? So things we've kind of already explored. Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu has already explored. The Buddha. The Buddha was suggesting that, fabrication, these activities that kind of shape our moment-to-moment experience, they're conditioners. They produce sort of an infrastructure that consciousness kind of plugs into. So here's where I think there's a lot of argument. I don't know if there still is. Again, I don't spend a lot of time, I'm not a scholar of this. But my understanding is that there kind of has always been, maybe, and continues to be, this is a sticking point for other wisdom traditions. This can be a really huge sticking point. Because the Buddha was suggesting that, consciousness can't really happen at all without fabrication. It can't happen by itself. And I think that my understanding is that the Buddha wasn't making a claim that there was no larger being out there. It was just a non-discussion. It wasn't what he was doing. That's not what Buddhism is talking about. It's not talking about that. That is one of the big breaks that my understanding and, breaking from Hinduism. It's not that it's making a claim that it doesn't exist. And here's my claim. As I've mentioned before, I've seen so many things directly that a Buddhist view of reality seems more probable to me than a reality that suggests that there is a great overseer. So Buddha was suggesting that conscious awareness happens when it can land somewhere, when it can start going to work on something. Form, feeling, perception, intention, attention, name and form. So it can't really happen if it doesn't land on that and then sort of, dance the dance with it. So you could say fabrication equals the constructed conditions that allow consciousness to arise in the first place. And now we're getting into some things that will, I know, be looking at much more, when we get into right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So going back to bodily, the three types of fabrication. So bodily fabrication, our breath, tension in the body, tensions, posture, and little micro adjustments that we make. So these are happening all of the time, right? How we're breathing, the tension in our body, how much we have, what we're doing with our body. Another fabrication is verbal fabrication. This is directed and sustained thought that forms concepts. So again, I use AI, right? And I kind of run it through my own, practice. And so this is exactly what Robot had to say. Verbal fabrication is the directed and sustained thought that forms concepts. The directed and sustained thought that forms concepts. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. So this is that dicey thing again, right? Where it suggests we have some control over the thought process via practice, sustained thought. Well, I think we can all agree that, most of us can't sustain our thought. I mean, probably now more than ever, to actually be able to hold your mind and body, mind-body, on one fixed object. How long can we do it? So there's this really great book that I love, the Four Agreements, and I can't remember the name of the author right now, but you can look it up. And one of the agreements has to do with speech and the importance of right speech, which we'll get to. It's one of the 8. But talking about how powerful our speech is, I was talking to someone a while ago about how they'd always wished that they could sing, and that when they were really young and in school, they were singing, and their teacher, basically in front of the class, humiliated them, said that they weren't any good and they should just go into something else. And that stayed with them into adulthood. They never pursued the things that singers pursue to become good singers, because they kind of had this early message kind of dropped in there. And, why wouldn't we believe it when we're kids? Different people react to that kind of messaging differently, right? But in this particular person's case, it wasn't conscious, I'm sure, but there was directed and sustained thought throughout their life that they're not a singer. They'll never sing. They don't have anything to offer. They weren't aware that they were doing it, that it was sustained. But it had to have been sustained because they wanted to learn how to sing when they were a child, and they never pursued it. So, of course, it was a sustained thought. That's why they never pursued it. They didn't think that they had anything, right? That's the sustained thought right there. So, yeah, good stuff. I'm going to wrap this part up right here because I want to keep on going. And like I said, I really want to finish this chapter today. And so I'm probably going to be going over the hour for sure. But really fascinating, this relationship between fabrication and consciousness. And we'll keep on moving. Okay, so here we go. Ignorance. Oh, what a complicated word. So the next subheading here under dependent co-arising is ignorance. The very thing that feeds fabrication, according to the Buddha. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns ignorance, the origination of ignorance, the cessation of ignorance, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of ignorance, then he is a person of right view, who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is ignorance? What is the origination of ignorance? What is the cessation of ignorance? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of ignorance? Any lack of knowledge with reference to stress, any lack of knowledge with reference to the origination of stress, any lack of knowledge with reference to the cessation of stress, any lack of knowledge with reference to the way of practice leading to the cessation of stress. This is called ignorance. From the origination of effluent comes the origination of ignorance. From the cessation of effluent comes the cessation of ignorance. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of ignorance is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So I'm going to get right into effluent, and I did not remember anything at all about effluent, so I'm very excited about this. I'm just going to keep on reading into effluent, which the Buddha suggests is the cause of ignorance. So let's keep going. Effluent. Saying, "Good friend, having delighted in and approved of Venerable Sariputta's words, the monks asked him a further question. Would there be another line of reasoning by which a disciple of the Noble Ones is a person of a right view, who has arrived at this true Dhamma? There would. When a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns effluent, the origination of effluent, the cessation of effluent, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of effluent, then he is a person of right view, who has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is effluent? What is the origination of effluent? What is the cessation of effluent? What is the way of practice leading to the cessation of effluent? There are these three effluents: the effluent of sensuality, the effluent of becoming, the effluent of ignorance. This is called effluent. From the origination of ignorance comes the origination of effluent. From the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of effluent. And the way of practice leading to the cessation of effluent is just this very Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Now, when a disciple of the Noble Ones discerns effluent, the origination of effluent, the cessation of effluent, and the way of practice leading to the cessation of effluent in this way, when, having entirely abandoned passion obsession, having abolished aversion obsession, having uprooted the view and conceit obsession, I am, having abandoned ignorance and given rise to clear knowing, he has put an end to suffering and stress right in the here and now. It is to this extent, too, that a disciple of the Noble Ones is a person of right view, one whose view is made straight, one who is endowed with verified confidence in the Dhamma, and who has arrived at this true Dhamma. That is what Venerable Sariputta said. Gratified, the monks delighted in Venerable Sariputta's words. And so all of that, dependent co-arising, comes from MN9. MN9, Sutta 130. And so I just want to take a moment here to, with the help of robots, remember, fact check me because I'm, as I say, to unpack, to penetrate the relationship between effluent and ignorance. And I'll be right back. Okay. So as if it wasn't already juicy, it's really about to get seriously juicy right now. So such good stuff here, such good stuff. And yeah, I feel pretty confident about what AI said. At least it certainly reflects the teaching that I got when I was first exposed to Buddhism here in the West. So anywho, I'm just going to do my best. So let's get into it. So the passage here talks about three kinds of effluence. Just kind of revisit those for a moment. Sensuality, becoming, and ignorance. Okay, yeah, so the three effluents that the Buddha is talking about here. And how, how those three effluents participate in the, I guess you could say, the cognitive feedback loop. The relationship between ignorance and effluence, ignorance and effluence, ignorance and influence. Put the needle on the put the needle, yeah, that thing. Hope you're still with me. So, the Buddha is saying, hey, there are three, and apparently what Robot is saying here is that the Pali for this is asavas, or leakages, kind of potential holes, potential places for a lack of mindfulness to kind of seep in, or anyway, I hope I'm doing that justice, and if not, my apologies. And that would be the three, right? Would be chasing pleasure, so sensuality, taste, smell, touch, feel, all the things. So sensual pleasure, chasing it. 2, building and reinforcing a sense of self and a story, the story around the self, reinforcing it. I am this kind of person. I am this. I am that. This is the kind of person that I am. And not seeing clearly, which would be the definition of ignorance to Buddhist view. So in other words, not really seeing how the mind actually works. So we want stuff, we build identity, and not really seeing how this can produce this reinforcement that can kind of keep us stuck. We just kind of, we can get kind of trapped in it. It can become problematic. It can produce a lot of ignorance. And so there you go. Dependent co-arising. So we still have a few pages to go. So yeah, this is probably going to be maybe an hour and a half, this episode, but we are going to be finishing up Right View. And much of it here has already been laid out for you by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu. So I don't really know that I have a whole lot much else to say, about Sutta 130 here, other than that this has just been such a pleasure for me. And I want to keep on going here because, we still have a couple pages to get through here to finish up Right View. And so we are going to do that by getting into the next sutta, bottom of page 237, Sutta 131. And Visakha is speaking here, asking Sister Dhammadina, "Now, lady, what are fabrications?" And Sister Dhammadina says, "These three fabrications, friend Visakha, bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. In and out breaths are bodily. These are things tied up with the body. That's why in and out breaths are bodily fabrications. Having first directed one's thoughts and made an evaluation, one then breaks out into speech. That's why directed thought and evaluation are verbal fabrications. Perceptions and feelings are mental. These are things tied up with the mind. That's why perceptions and feelings are mental fabrications." And that comes from MN 44. And, you know, we've already talked about this. This is really just kind of summing it up. Sister Dhammadina is a very practical nun here, you know, and probably practical because she's seen it for herself. And once again, I would come back to, I would argue, as will you. If you take up a serious meditation practice, you take it seriously, you too will see these playing out in your own daily visits to the mat. If you can stomach it. Yeah, if you can stomach it. Okay, so now we're getting into, oh my God, final right view. Yeah, so we're coming up into a subsection called Final Right View, top of page 238 in the digital book, if you've got it. Then Anapandika, I hope I got that right, then Anapandika, the householder, went to where the wanderers of other sects were were staying. On arrival, he greeted them courteously. After an exchange of friendly greetings and courtesies, he sat to one side. As he was sitting there, the wanderers said to him, "Tell us, householder, what views Gautama the contemplative has?" "Venerable sirs, I don't know entirely what views the Blessed One has." Well, well, so you don't know entirely what views Gautama the contemplative has. Then tell us what views the monks have." "I don't even know entirely what views the monks have." "So you don't know entirely what views Gautama the contemplative has, or even that the monks have. Then tell us what views you have." "It wouldn't be difficult for me to expound to you what views I have. But please, let the Venerable Ones expound each in line with his view standpoint. And then it won't be difficult for me to expound to you what views I have." When this had been said, one of the wanderers said to Anapandika the householder, "The cosmos is eternal. Only this is true. Anything otherwise is worthless. This is the sort of view I have." Another wanderer said to Anapandika, "The cosmos is not eternal. Only this is true. Anything otherwise is worthless. This is the sort of view I have." And so now, as I continue reading here, there are a lot of ellipses. And so he's implying, I'm assuming he's implying with these ellipses that this would be the room, each person in the room going around and saying, well, this is my view, this is my view, this is my view, this is my view, right? Circling back around to the beginning of the sutta where everybody thinks that they know how it is and what this means, this ride that we're on, etc. So another wanderer said, "The cosmos is finite, ellipses. The cosmos is infinite, ellipses. The soul is the same thing as the body, ellipses. The soul is one thing and the body another, ellipses. After death, a Tathagata exists, ellipses. After death, a Tathagata does not exist, ellipses. After death, a Tathagata both does and does not exist, ellipses. After death, a Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. Only this is true. Anything otherwise is worthless. This is the sort of view I have." Oh, that's a joy. Yeah, so here we go, right? Everybody is quite certain that their view is most certainly the truth. When this had been said, Anapandika the householder said to the wanderers, "As for the Venerable One who says, 'The cosmos is eternal, only this is true, anything otherwise is worthless,' this is the sort of view I have. His view arises from his own inappropriate attention or independence on the words of another. Now this view has been brought into being, is fabricated, willed, dependently, co-arisen. Whatever has been brought into being is fabricated, willed, dependently co-arisen. That is inconstant. Whatever is inconstant is stressful. This venerable one thus adheres to that very stress, submits himself to that very stress, and then in brackets it says, similarly for the other view standpoints. When this had been said, the wanderers said to Anapandica, the householder, we have each and every one expounded to you in line with our own view standpoints. Now tell us what views you have. Whatever has been brought into being is fabricated, willed, dependently co-arisen. That is inconstant. Whatever is inconstant is stressful. Whatever is stressful is not me, is not what I am, is not myself. This is the sort of view I have. So, householder, whatever has been brought into being is fabricated, willed, dependently co-arisen. That is inconstant. Whatever is inconstant is stressful. You thus adhere to that very stress. Submit yourself to that very stress. Venerable sirs, whatever has been brought into being is fabricated, willed, dependently co-arisen. That is inconstant. Whatever is inconstant is stressful. Whatever is stressful is not me, is not what I am, is not myself. Having seen this well, with right discernment, as it has come to be, I also discern the higher escape from it, as it has come to be. When this was said, the wanderers fell silent, abashed, sitting with their shoulders drooping, their heads down, brooding, at a loss for words. Anapandica, the householder, sensing that the wanderers were silent, abashed, at a loss for words, got up and went to the Blessed One. On arrival, having bowed down to the Blessed One, he sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he told the Blessed One the entirety of his discussion with the wanderers. In brackets, the Blessed One said, well done, householder, well done. That is how you should periodically and righteously refute those foolish men. Then he instructed, urged, roused, and encouraged Anapandica the householder with a talk on Dhamma. When Anapandica the householder had been instructed, urged, roused, and encouraged by the Blessed One with a talk on Dhamma, he got up from his seat, and having bowed down to the Blessed One, left, keeping the Blessed One on his right side. Not long afterward, the Blessed One addressed the monks. Monks, even one who has long penetrated the Dhamma in this Dhamma and Vinaya would do well, periodically and righteously, to refute the wanderers of other sects in just the way Anapandica, the householder, has done. And that comes from AN 10:93. There is so much period and cultural information going on here that I absolutely need to do a little research before I even begin to attempt to unpack this, but I'm really looking forward to it. So before we move on, I will go see what I can find out, and I'll come back to talk a little bit about this. So be right back. All right, so this is such great stuff here. Yeah, I'm glad that I did a little bit of research here because I just wanted to make sure that I didn't misunderstand or misinterpret certain behavior that this sutta was describing. For instance, I wasn't really sure what was meant by keeping on the right side of Gautama. So apparently it was really etiquette that you didn't turn your back on a teacher, that you kept them on your right side without necessarily turning your back, so that you weren't. It was a sign of respect. So that was one thing I found out that I thought was pretty cool. Let's see, other things that, I've seen that so many times in this book, and I just wanted to kind of understand what the cultural explanation was for it, and I absolutely love it. So anytime I hear sitting, or you hear, because I'm reading this, sitting to one side, what was the cultural relevance of that idea, sitting to one side of a teacher? So again, same idea that, visitors didn't just sit anywhere they wanted to. They sat slightly to the right or left of the teacher. Once again, culturally, it was a sign of respect for the teacher. Let's see, what else did I find out? Well, I already knew this, but I wanted to share it, because I think it's really cool. And to my mind, it makes me think about great philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle. And again, I forget, one didn't write and one wrote for the other, or however that works. I used to know the story on all of that. But when the Buddha, in the Buddhist time, when he was teaching, historically, what we know is that it was much like how the Greeks taught, which is that they didn't, quote unquote, teach. It was, much more about kind of wandering around and debating with other people about how all of this works. And so it was really kind of a constant, debate rather than a testing of ego, testing for clarity, sharpening discernment, exposing any clinging. And to my mind, that's the function of a Sangha today. And I would imagine that, Stoics today, modern day Stoics, have mechanisms too, probably also community. I don't know, I'm not a Stoic, but I know that there are modern day Stoic communities, and I have to assume that because I know they also operate that way, that it serves the same function. That we do this in community so that we don't get trapped in the ego. Now back to just what's going on here, which, I think it was pretty clear in the text. Another thing I love about Buddhism, I find that it's kind of practical. It's not difficult to penetrate. Breath, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, they automatically build the human experience. It just happens. Dependent co-arising. It happens. These are fabrications. If we don't recognize this, if we don't see this for ourselves, right view, then we'll just go on throughout life clinging to our views as if they are the ultimate truth. And Anapadika, the householder here, is saying, that every fixed view that any one of us holds is just a mental construction. That's it. It's made, it's unstable, it's stressful, it's devised, fabricated, etc., etc. Clinging to our views is ignorance. That would be the moral of this sutta, to my view. All right, well, I had really wanted to finish chapter 3, but I also want to respect your time, your attention, and I fear that if I keep on going, this will be a 2-hour episode, and I really don't want to do that to you. So I am going to wrap it up right here, and there will be one more episode for chapter 3 and right view, but we are in the final pages of right view. I hope you got something useful out of the reading today and the commentary, and maybe something that you can apply to your own life that you think will assist you if you feel that you need assistance. Maybe you've already got a path that's working quite well for you, in which case, woo, right on. And thank you for your support. And I hope that you will take good care. Bye.